Hey, I'm Jamie Dixon for Guitarist magazine.
And I'm Neville Martin.
So, changing of the guard at Gibson. They've got a new CEO, JC Curley, and he replaces Henry Juskowitz, who, it's fair to say, made some decisions which weren't popular with the Gibson lovers over the years, especially the 2015 models with their wide nuts and the robot tuners and all of that sort of thing. So, with the changing of the guard comes a return to traditional values, and many of us have said over the years, why don't Gibson just do an absolutely banging classic Les Paul, with no fancy bells and buzzers, but just drenched in the heritage of the bursts that we love. And to be fair, with its 2019 range, the first under JC Curley, we've kind of been given that, haven't we? And we've got 4 guitars to show you today. The first 2 that we're going to show are the Les Paul Standard 50s and 60s. So we're going to kick off with these because in a way, these are the answer to many people's prayers, or at least what Gibson hopes are the answer to many people's prayers, aren't they, Nev?
Definitely. Things like the wide binding that's been appearing on the necks of guitars made them have a very different kind of feel. They didn't feel like old guitars or guitars that people like me have been used to over the years. The tops have been kind of iffy. Everything's kind of not been very Les Paul-like, not very familiar to somebody who's familiar with playing Les Pauls. It's like you're picking up another beast from another planet, not a planet that you're familiar with.
Yeah, and absolutely, these guitars we have here are I guess, Gibson's attempt to say, hey, we've listened to you, and this is all of the things that you were saying addresses all those points.
As soon as you pick it up, it feels like a Gibson Les Paul, which is the thing that everybody has been asking about. If you look at it, before you go really close up to it, if you look at it, everything's right. There's some nice flaming on the top, 1-piece mahogany back and 1-piece mahogany neck, 70-degree neck pitch. Everything kind of looks right, and the neck shape's fantastic. The action's really nice. It's set up well, and you think, oh wow, this is a Gibson Les Paul.
Yeah. So to give a bit of extra detail on the specs, Nev's holding the Les Paul Standard 50s. So as you'd expect, that's got the chunkier neck profile on it.
Yeah.
That's a quarter sawn single piece mahogany neck. It's got a slab sawn mahogany body, as you were saying. That's the body itself, not the maple cap. 2-piece maple cap, which is absolutely standard. No weight relief on the 50s standard.
But it's not. I mean, I've got a 57 custom shop, which is much lighter than this.
Yeah.
But this isn't out of the ballpark.
No.
In fact, in the review in the magazine this month, Dave Burlock, who wrote the review, talks about the weights in the Burstbucker book.
Yeah.
And these are well within all the weights listed in those 58s, 59s, and 60s. Yeah. So this is not out of the realm of the weight of normal Gibson Les Pauls. And as Dave also says, you put a decent strap on it, you don't really know.
Yeah, well, that's absolutely right. Now I've got the 60s version, if you like. So it's the Les Paul Standard 60s, and there are a few little differences that you want to note here. And if you're weighing up which one of these you might like to get, what you get is the slim taper neck on this. You get the Grovers, and you do get slightly different humbuckers. So on that one you've got the Burstbucker 1 and 2. Yeah. On this one you've got the 61 rhythm and treble Burstbucker. So that's a slightly different variation. And again, the clues in the name, the 61R, 61T goes with the 60s provenance there.
Yeah.
There are a couple of little cheeky anachronisms here. You've got these silver-topped control knobs here, which would have only really been seen on the 68 reissues of the burst that came in, but they put that in here now just probably to differentiate it a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I prefer these. I mean, to me they're part of what makes a Les Paul feel like a Les Paul, especially this era Les Paul. But I mean, these are tiny things, and you take a few quid to change a couple of knobs if it offends you. Yeah. But you love that slim neck. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of the slimmer neck. I had a 61 335 that had that same dimension neck on it, and I played it fine, but I prefer this kind of fistful really in my hand.
It's a real sort of Marmite thing, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
I mean, some people find those a bit much. I'm like you, I would prefer the fuller neck, because actually they're strangely comfortable to play. People associate them with...
A lot of guys, I mean, for years guitars went for that really thin neck because it was deemed, oh, you could play faster on a thin neck. I'm not really, I mean, I can't play fast anyway, but I'm not really sure that you necessarily can. And obviously, the heavy metal rock guitars do have all thin necks, so possibly that's true. You don't play that kind of music on these guitars. You play much more feel-based music, whether that's rock or whether it's blues or whatever. So it's not quite as important. But a lot of guys love that slimmer neck, and I'm not decrying it at all. But for my taste, I prefer the slightly bigger neck.
So would you go, if you were sort of designing your perfect Les Paul from this, with this 50s into 60s flavour, would you go with the Grovers or the deluxe style ones?
As a guitar repairer, I fitted so many Grovers to Gibson guitars as a job, which obviously I now regret, because at the time it was an upgrade. Now it's seen as a degrade, certainly in terms of value. And they were put on at the time because the clusons that came on Gibsons at that time were very loose and very, they were different one to the next. I mean, on my old 335, the G string just slipped. It would just go around on its own. So I had to upgrade that. I put shallers on my own 335. So they were done because these weren't up to it. They are now up to it, and they're lovely. They're much more consistent, and they're beautiful tuners. And I remember Paul Reed Smith saying that the lighter weight tuner on the headstock, the better the tone to the guitar, because they can detract. I don't know how true that is, but Paul does know his stuff.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, isn't it? There's a little bit of extra mass there, and whether quite what that amounts to is probably the
caveat being, look at so many famous. Look at Gary Moore's 15.9. Look at Jimmy Page's. All got Grovers on them. And they didn't make a bad tone between them, did they?
No. So it's not hardly going to be a deal breaker.
It's nitpicking. It's silly, and the whole business about the weight. People talk about, it's got to be light. Well, why has it got to be light? Well, do you know why it's got to be light? Well, no, everybody says it's got to be light. So
So basically, I mean, for the purposes of anyone watching at home who obviously can't feel the heft of these, this is a little bit heavier. This is probably what you'd call a chunky weight Les Paul. That one is kind of, like you say, well within tolerance. It's not what you'd pick up and go, oh my, that's a super light Les Paul, but it's absolutely what you'd expect. It's not a boat anchor, but it is a little bit heavier than a Strat or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, anybody who's played 70s Les Pauls will be very familiar with heavy Les Pauls, and this isn't. I don't think this is in the ballpark of some of those I've played. They were weighty monsters. I remember some of the Les Paul Customs that we quality controlled when I worked at Gibson. You picked them out of the box, and it was like, as you say, a boat anchor.
So no fancy electronics on these ones, so which is kind of gratifying. I mean, Gibson have got a modern range for incorporating some quite interesting switching stuff, which we'll come to in a little bit. But these are kind of absolutely canon, aren't they? Really?
Yeah, and they did get some things right in those tweaked Les Pauls, because a lot of people I know do look at Jimmy Page's Les Pauls full of extra, switchery, because he needed more sounds out of the one guitar. And people do like that, and I don't think there's anything wrong in including those things. But on these guitars, which are supposed to be the staple, then leave them as they were, because enough nice tones have been made out of them over the decades that you don't think you need to add to it. They do sound differently, though these two guitars, don't they?
Yeah, it is quite tangible. They're neither of them are bad, but I think we both slightly liked, interestingly, the 60s just a touch more. It's got a little bit more.
It's a bit more open, I think. I think this is a bit more of a kind of, I don't know, it's probably a more powerful. You want to play those Angus Young chords or those Townsend. Those big horsepower kind of chords. That's possibly a little bit more delicate. A
bit more subtle, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, so I suppose the big question really is, Gibson have tried to sort of, if you like, make amends for missteps of the past with this range. Both these guitars are actually kind of what people ask for, but they're also quite keenly priced, aren't they? They're just shy of £2,000, so they are under £2,000 each, and they're both that price. So what do you think of that, Nev? Do you think that Gibson have hit the nail on the head with these?
I do. I mean, we've discussed it. Various people I know have discussed it, and we've said, why can't they just make a great Les Paul for under £2,000 quid? $2,000 and a bit or whatever. They've done it, and that, I think it's right. I think if you want to pay £5+ grand for a custom shop one by artisan luthiers who've spent hours fettling this, that, and the other, fine. That's absolutely fine. But if you want to go into a shop, get a guitar off the shelf, and in fact, individually, there's a picture of your own guitar in the case. This guitar has a picture of this guitar in the case, so in quality control, so you can actually see your guitar being worked on in the Gibson factory. So you're buying the guitar that's pictured in your case. And I think that price point is fantastic for a guitar like this. If you look at, if you like, the main opposition to Gibson, which is Fender, these are pretty much in that kind of ballpark.
You have to say
really,
they are,
yeah.
don't they? Because it was always the case that I don't know, you would expect a Les Paul, slightly more complex guitar to put together than a Strat, to be, I don't know, just that same ratio of more expensive that these are from the American originals, which are the US.
Exactly,
vintage
and
ones.
I think they both, I find both companies actually, although we're talking about Gibson, they've got it right. They've created a product that's at the quality level that people expect, and at the price level that people think, well, actually that's fair, I can aspire to that.
Yeah.
I can save up a few months, I can buy it or whatever. I would be more than happy to go out and gig this guitar or that one.
Yeah. I think it's almost a case of actually, you know, we were laughing about this earlier on, that there's so few bells and whistles beyond what is absolutely classic on these, that is almost in a weird sort of happy way, there's almost not that much to talk about because they kind of got it right. So I think good job, Gibson. I think that's a good price. It remains to be seen whether that's a sweetener to get people back on board, or whether that will stay true. But I certainly hope it does, because I think they've got that formula back right again.
And they have, and I think, you know, you said earlier on, you know, while the cat was away, the mice did come out to play, and there are several manufacturers making rather nice single cut guitars for this kind of money. And now to have this kind of guitar with that name on the headstock for that kind of money,
It's game on, isn't it?
that's game on, definitely, definitely. And it means that Gibson have to stay on their game, and the others do too, which is good for all of us, because when PRS came out and Taylor came out, they kicked the big names, you know,
Kept them honest,
in the cojones, and it brought them up as well. So they all came up because of those two.
Okay, great. Well, we're going to listen to some sounds next, so you can hear what these guitars sound like when we put them through their paces, and then we'll move on to a tribute and a classic. So the tribute is a very affordable one from the range, and the classic is one which has a few more bells and buzzers in terms of tonal options. So we'll do that in a minute, but first let's hear some sounds. Okay, so two more guitars here, and just as the first two guitars, the 50s and 60s that we looked at, were clearly aimed at satisfying the traditional Gibson fan, there's still room, without going all the way back to the innovations nobody liked, for a little bit of progression, isn't there?
Absolutely.
So these two guitars are really all about that. Nev's holding the Les Paul Classic, and I've got the Tribute, which is further down. This is more sort of entry-level Les Paul. This has got certain features which make it affordable, but still pretty nice. And this has got a few more bells and buzzers, tonally speaking, than the 50s and 60s we looked at. So, so let's talk about the Classic first. This one, you've got the Burstbucker 61 R&T, that's rhythm and treble, and you've also got some quite clever sort of switching options on this one, haven't you?
Yeah, but I mean, first and foremost, this does have the wider neck binding that I was talking about earlier, so it does feel different. It's also got more of the 60 profile neck, so it's a pretty wide, flat feeling kind of neck, rather than the chunkier palm filling neck of the 50s one. Other than that, it looks like a classic Les Paul. I mean, many famous Les Paul players took the covers off to give you that look, and people do like the zebra look. It's got the Grovers on it as well. So this almost looks like this is the modded Les Paul. I mean, Jimmy Page did something very similar to what's been done here.
Well, in actual fact, the modding goes more than skin deep, doesn't it? Because
Yeah.
this one's got the 9-hole weight relief. So they
Yeah.
take a little, they put some holes in underneath the maple cap. You can't see them; they're just in the
Yeah.
mahogany side, and that's just to make, you know, that traditional complaint of Les Pauls, valid or not. Some people prefer a lighter guitar, don't they?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's aimed at the kind of the top 40 player who's going to be on stage for maybe 3 45-minute sets a night. Who wants to use the same guitar, wants to get as many tones out of that one guitar as they can, because you can whack it in the gig bag and take it to the gig, your amp, your pedal board, blah blah blah, and use that one guitar all night. This has got so many sounds on it; it's untrue, really.
Mm-hmm. So, should we talk about some of the sounds?
Yeah.
Because again, they've kept the looks classic, but beneath the surface of it, there's absolutely bags of tonal options here. It's actually sort of rather more kind of like a Swiss Army knife than a lot of Les Pauls, isn't it?
With all the tone controls down,
That's normal.
it works like a normal Les Paul, so you know exactly what that is. You know, rhythm pickup or neck pickup, bridge pickup, both pickups on, volume for that, tone and tone. So, you know, and you know all the usual blends that you can get with that. Woman tone back right off like that, blah blah blah.
And there's loads of variation just in that.
Just in that, yeah.
So, but where this varies is that because they've done some quite interesting switching with this, when they're push-pull pots, and when you start lifting them up, that's when the surprises happen. So, what you've got is you've got 2 coil taps underneath the volume control, if you like. So, if you lift that one up, what you get is a tap on the neck, but there's a variation on that. So shall we go through it piece by piece?
Okay.
Okay. So first up, if you lift the neck pickup volume control, what you've got there is this inner slug coil voiced in a tap. So I don't know if you want to just do a little quick comparison. Okay. If you then raise the tone control, so that's the neck pickup, both tone and volume controls raised up. That's voicing the outer screw coil there.
It's subtly different.
It's
A little bit more
hotter.
clarity, perhaps,
Yeah.
a little bit hotter, perhaps.
A bit hotter on the
Yeah.
screw coils.
Yeah. That's brighter, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So okay, so on the outer screw coil, it's a little bit hotter, but less well defined. If you prefer a sort of more classically single coil-esque sound, the inner slug coil does that for you.
And those kind of sounds, they'll come into their own at higher volumes when you're actually working live, because when you're working live, 5% difference can be the difference between choosing that and not choosing it, and that's how it works, isn't it?
And it's nice, actually, when you've got an amp that's already pushed quite hard, sometimes having the ability to just knock back the output
Absolutely.
at the flick of the switch is quite nice.
Yeah.
There's a further trick up the sleeve of this, though. If you put the volume control down again, so that's just if you like, the special function switch raised. You put the control in the pickup control in the middle. You've now got an out of phase sound. So tone on the neck pickup control up. You've got out of phase between the two main pickups.
But just as long as the pickup selector is in the middle position. So you get that Peter Greeny.
You hear that honk there, can't you?
Yeah, it's lovely sound, actually.
Okay, moving on to the bridge pickup controls. There's further tones that you can unlock using the push-pull pots. So firstly, let's hear it just as it is standard. Okay, so if you lift the volume control, you get a tapped sound. Now, just to reiterate, this is not a split sound, so this is not one where it's going to drop away in volume, but you do get a subtly more single coil-like sound. So, variations on a theme there.
It's
really.
it's hard to say what it sounds like. It doesn't sound like it's... You expect a tap to thin right out, and it doesn't do that.
Yeah.
But you think of a Telecaster bridge pickup, it's really fat.
Yeah.
So, you know, you could be getting that kind of effect from it.
Yeah. And again, like we were saying, they've set it up so it isn't that kind of the split, the chord split
Yeah.
sound that we've known and know and don't like.
Yeah.
If you know what I
You
mean.
can hear it when you play a chord. If you play. Doing a kind of bit of a wah-wah-y thing, so it is changing it. But as I say, you don't really notice it. We're at a very low volume here. Once you get up to a working gigging volume, all these things really come into their own much more.
So we've got one final tonal option up our sleeve, and this was introduced on the 2012 standards, I believe, the first time we saw, which was a blower switch, which is where if you raise the tone control, you get the signal coming straight out of the bridge pickup, not via the volume.
So none of those controls work. That's bypassing everything straight out. So it's that extra level of guts, and it's a great thing because you can preset your, say you want to be on that single coil, on it, that coil on its own, but then your solo is there. You just whack that up, and you've gone from this very specific sound to this, or even you could go to the middle position and have your Peter Greeny sound. Whack that up, you go straight to the bridge pickup, straight out. So it's a very, very useful option.
Yeah. So basically, it's you've got taps on the volume controls, special functions on the tone controls, and you know, although you know when you first kind of cast your eye over it, it seems a little bit fiddly. It's not really, and I think actually, unlike some switching systems that seem to offer you like, I don't know, 25 shades of meh, this is. Like the blower switch is a really distinct sound with a definite purpose, and the out of phase is a classic sort of.
And they relate to the pickup, so you're not being confused. That relates to that pickup. That relates to that pickup. That blower switch even relates to that pickup. So it's very quick to discover. The only one is that which is the both pickups on. That's the only one that's not specific to its own pickup because it only works with both on.
And it's worth mentioning, like this is shares some features in common with the 60s, but actually this is I think about 300 quid less expensive.
Yeah.
But you get all of that with it. You get the same burst bucker, the 61 burst buckers, and the weight relief. So I mean, to be honest, this is a very good shout for significantly under £2,000, isn't it?
It's the Gigger's guitar of the four guitars here. It's the one that somebody in a band who works a lot, this is the guitar.
And outwardly, the cool thing is outwardly no one would know that wasn't just a kind of reissue style 60s
They wouldn't.
Les Paul.
Or they might think I mean, these are the mods that people have done themselves over years.
Yeah.
So you've essentially buying your modded Les Paul.
Yeah. And you're getting it for less than the 50s and 60s. So fair play, Gibson. That's an awful lot of guitar for the money.
It's that classic 70s looking, in fact it's better because it's got two-piece, not the 70s ones with three-piece. So it's classic 70s cherry sunburst, non-flamed. It's got the open-top humbuckers, proper, we should say, ABR1 bridge, not the Nashville bridge that they put later on that people again didn't particularly like. In fact, it's on the Nashville kind of studs, which is great because it's a much more robust fit, but it's the ABR1 style size bridge, and I like that. In fact, I did that on a guitar of mine. It's a great mod.
Yeah. So again, I mean that's a lot of guitar for the money. But speaking of value, so I suppose we should now come along to our tribute.
Yep.
Which is the cheapest of the bunch, and in some ways the least, textbook of the Les Pauls.
Yeah.
But there's a reason for that, because it's significantly cheaper. So let's talk about some of the differences from the classic Les Paul format that have made the tribute a really affordable option. The first difference, though you wouldn't immediately spot it necessarily, is that it's got a maple neck. So not a mahogany neck here. It's the same shape and sort of form factor, but it is a maple neck.
Yeah.
You've got a satin nitro finish, so it's not a high gloss finish, though it is a nice sort of thin nitro feel. It's got that lovely sort of slightly tacky feel to it. I don't mean sticky, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel box fresh. No binding anywhere, which we did sort of think.
It's a funny thing, the binding, because it's very easy to look at this style of Les Paul with the two humbuckers on it and expect it to have binding, because two humbucker Les Pauls have always had binding. Well, almost always had binding. It's these are kind of in a way harking back to the juniors and specials of the late 50s, early 60s, which didn't have any binding in it, but they were made to a price as well. That they happen to have become essentially, especially collectible guitars, but they were made as junior guitars. They were made as kids' starter guitars. And not that these are kids' starter guitars, but these are affordable, workable guitars with no nonsense.
So you can buy a Les Paul. You can get started in that illustrious family of instruments with something like this, and it's a very cool guitar. It's the lightest of the bunch. It's got weight relief, and actually
it's a bit thinner, isn't it?
It's a bit thinner. Yeah, we measured it. It's a little bit less. So if you were the sort of person who really valued a nice lightweight guitar, this would be the pick of the bunch. It's got 490 R&T pickups, so it's rhythm and treble.
Those pickups have been around for so long, and they're so tried and tested on Gibson guitars that everybody knows those pickups. They're great pickups.
That's right. So again, it's quite a lot for the money here. So especially as this is significantly cheaper than the rest, which we'll come to in a little bit.
And the maple is going to add a different kind of tonality to the guitar. It's going to make it a little bit brighter.
So should we have a little listen and see? We'll jam through a track and see how these sound together.
Yeah. One thing I just noticed actually is these two have got bigger strap buttons. The conventional Gibson strap button is tiny, and it's really easy for your strap to fall off. So this is a little upgrade that you don't really notice, but might save your guitar.
So we played all four Gibsons, all the way from the Tribute, which is 749 quid, which is fantastic value for an official Les Paul, albeit with some sort of measures, construction elements that make it a little bit cheaper. All the way up to the 50s and 60s Les Pauls at just shy of £2,000, and we've played them, we've had a go on them. What's your thoughts, Nev?
Well, I've always loved the stripped down ethic of the posh name guitars, if you like. And while obviously you can look at this and the edges of the headstock are square as anything, that's looks almost like it's just come off the machine, and the finish isn't exactly subtle. They haven't revealed the binding edges, which they could have done, but that costs more money. Remember, anything, $1 in the factory probably translates to $100 on the price in terms of how it gets translated. But this sounds great. I mean, it weighs nothing. It's really easy to sling around your neck. We just demoed it. It sounded really nice. It's a very cool little guitar. I mean, remember the Gary Moore signature? That didn't have binding on it, and that was a pretty simple one. And then they had the one that was almost a previous stage to this, where it still had the pre-routing, the pre-smoothing off gouges in the top, didn't it? Do you remember?
Yeah.
So I like these stripped down things. It's just a couple of bits of wood with pickups on it that sounds great.
So yeah, $749. That's comparable roughly to Fender's sort of Mexican-made ranges, or the sort of higher end of that maybe.
Yeah.
And you get an official Les Paul made in the USA, and it's got the right name on the headstock and those words on the back. So fair play, Gibson, for bringing in a very affordable way to get on the official sort of Les Paul ladder, if you will.
The neck's really comfortable, actually. It's really comfortable to play. It's got the same, pretty much similar dimensions to the 50s one. It's very nice to play. I mean, all of the guitars could do with a bit of lemon oil on the fretboards, but that's not an uncommon thing. But they're great players, and they all sound different.
They do all sound different.
Subtly different to one another.
I would say of the lot, one I'm most intrigued by is this Classic, because you think you've got your £300 or so cheaper than the 60s.
Yeah.
You get the same burst bucker, the 61 R&T burst buckers on here. You get all of the switching options, which even if you didn't like them and you never touched them from one year end to the next, it's not adversely affecting the way it behaves as a normal Les Paul.
Not at all. And
you can use it. There'll always be
something. You
something.
get to know what you like and the bits that you use. It's like you get any technology. Look at your phone, look at your car, look at, I use a Line 6 Helix. I use that much percentage of it, but it sounds great to me.
I've always found that with Mesa amps as well, is that, all right, they give you the option, and in certain situations you're glad of having the flexibility, but mostly you find something that works for you and you stick with that until a situation arises where you need a bit more.
And the next guy plays it totally differently to you, and that's the great thing about that. The next person is going to play in totally different settings to you, but he'll use the guitar, they will use the guitar as they like it.
This for me sits in the sweetest of sweet spots in terms of the value for money, but we go up to the 50s and 60s. What you're really getting there is exactly what we said. Everybody cried out for, can you do an absolutely classic 50s and 60s style Les Paul burst that isn't R9 sort of custom shop prices, but it is very credible and very traditional. And Gibson have said, here you go, here's your steak and chips cooked exactly as you like it, and it's under £2,000. And to be fair, in terms of listening to their customers, I think they've done a good job of that. And
that steak and chips cooked as you like it is a great analogy, because if you like the slimmer neck, you can get the slimmer neck. If you like the fat neck, you can get that. If you like the different colours, if you like the different weights, you, as I said before, the picture of the guitar in the case is the one you get. Some of the shops are actually showing you the guitar on the website, and that's the one you buy. I think that's quite important, because for me, I'm turned on or off by the look of a Les Paul. If I don't like the colour, I won't buy the Les Paul. You can change everything else, can't you? And so I think that's really important. So the range of colours, I mean, that's got the 50s one we've got here has got a dark burst.
And that looks really stunning. I would say that's really the look of the bunch,
that's the look. But I don't like the sound of it quite as much as the 60, although I don't like the playability of the 60.
But, do you know what? I think we haven't heard like rubbish tones here or ones that felt really irrelevant. What we're getting is variations on a theme, which is kind of it's classic, but at the same time you've got your choice, haven't you? So
you know what else? It might get people go back into dealers and say, can I try the new range of Les Pauls? Sit down with them through your favourite amp and find the one that you like.
And absolutely, and I think one thing that's worth returning to, which you mentioned, is you've got in the cases you've got QC evidence that relates particularly to your guitar, and on the evidence of these four guitars at least, we haven't seen any of the lapses that Gibson was so often accused of in the latter days of the previous
we haven't.
management.
Another little things, I mean, in the case of this guitar is the little cream rhythm treble ring that you might want to put on. In the two more expensive guitars, there's a plain truss rod cover. So if you don't want it to have the standard written on it, you have the plain cover, which the original ones had.
Okay, so crunch time. If you're taking your own money down to the store tomorrow, which one of these would you plump for and why?
Oh dear. Tonally, I like the 60s one. Looks-wise, I like the 50s one. What I would do is I'd go in a store and that stocks them, and I'd try several until I find the one. I'd go for one of those two because I prefer that. I don't use all those switching options, so I don't do that. I'm a bit too long in the tooth to go for a guitar like this. Although actually, there might be something really nicely inverted snobbishness about using a guitar like this. You know, it didn't harm Gary, did it? He loved to go out with it.
Yeah.
I'd probably find a 50s one that I really liked. That's what I'd do.
Okay, I think I would go, if it was spending my own money and we're not in fancy football land, we are actually taking money down to the shop, I'd get this one because you know what, you're a good deal under £2,000.
Yeah.
I've got variations, say I'm in the studio and you just want something, nothing's quite sitting right in the track, I've got all of the options there. I've got the blower switch if I want to just have almost like a virtual boost pedal. It's not a boost, but you know what I mean. You can kick it up a gear in the solos. And none of it spoiling the looks or the traditional functionality of this. So I would say as a sweet spot between all of the features and the value that we've seen in these, I'd probably take this one. I absolutely would.
Yeah, and if you don't like open top covers, you can get a set of Gibson covers for next to nothing. Put them on yourself.
No biggie. There we go. Good job, Gibson.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think they've done a stunning job here with these new guitars.
Great. Okay. Well, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.